Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about Season 4 Mythic Plus, as we've had a couple days to see how these dungeons are shaping up, what's been going on with them, and start relearning a lot of the old content, which last time I did was like 6-something years ago. So, in that vein, it's actually been pretty fun, and if you guys are no idea what Season 4 is all about, it's basically revamping old dungeons, bringing them up to a Mythic Plus level, like Lower Karazhan, or up all of Karazhan, as well as Grimrail, Iron Docks, both Mechagons, both Tazvesh, and rolling it all in together for one M+ season, and then having a weekly rotation for raiding, where 1 week will be Nathria, then it'll be Sanctum of Domination, then it'll be Sepulchre with increased difficulty, increased eye level rewards, do them all over again, etc. So far, I think it's actually pretty fun, but it's a little bit of a conflict for me between whether I want to reprog fights that I already did a year ago versus dungeons for me, which are a lot of fun because it gives me a lot of nostalgia and a lot of hype as to what dungeons used to be like, which is what this video is about. I wanted to talk about how I think that the Shadowlands dungeons in general, and also the latest affix, the Season 3 affix, really made Mythic Plus too easy, and now we're actually getting into a really, really cool phase for healers, most specifically. That's what we like to talk about here. For healers, in terms of just how well you are perceived to be good or bad at what you are. Namely, I'm showing you a lot of Karazhan footage throughout this, because Karazhan's a great dungeon to test healers, and while it's incredibly difficult, and it's probably breaking most people's keys, this is the real gauntlet for a lot of healers that was faced in the past, but it was only faced by very specific classes of healers. One of the most exciting things about this is I actually get to do these dungeons as Holy Priest, which was terrible. Oh, so terrible back in Legion M+. But now I actually get to do it, and I actually can perform decently well with it as well, because the spec is still incredibly, incredibly powerful in a high-key environment. So, with that, they've changed so much of how M+ really starts working over the years, whether it's been seasonal affixes giving mana return back, which happened all of Shadowlands, but also, most importantly, how bosses and how trash operate, where the threat really starts lying. In Lower Karazhan, there's a number of areas where the threat is on the tank, where the threat is on, your tank being able to survive, however many mobs are pulled together, and the DPS has got to kick like 1 or 2 things, and they can round them up, and they'll be fine. Other dungeons, the threat is more so on the group, and we notice that quite a bit more in like Grimrail and Iron Docks, which have a lot of party-wide damage, a lot of avoidable AoEs, a lot of sort of combos where you get hit by like a fire patch, and then there's a random hunter shooting you, and then there's axes being thrown, the works, right? And then there's boss fights, where boss fights have varying levels of avoidable or unavoidable damage, but Shadowlands felt way too heavy on the unavoidable side, on the avoidable side, where there were so many avoidable mechanics and not so many that actually dealt unavoidable damage. I think Sanguine Depths was like the biggest example of a boss fight or an entire dungeon with lots of unavoidable damage that you just had to heal through. But if you go into something like Halls of Atonement, you have like 3 bosses that deal 0 damage whatsoever to your party, and then only Echelon that really requires some kind of healing out of the healer. You start going into Karazhan as well, you have just massive dot damage out of the Maiden of Virtue. Attumen, depending on how long your group takes the debuff, can be some decent AoE damage. Depending on how you're soaking some of the Shared Suffering, can be even more AoE damage. But Morose and Maiden, just really, really heavy party-wide damage all the time. And yeah, it's great if you got some immunities, but a lot of times you're still going to have to muscle heal through mechanics for a very, very long period of time, and that can be extremely exhausting for your healer, and that's where it really tests you. Go to Upper Karazhan as well, there's even more threats. You have to deal with like Flame Wreath or the Arcane Birds or any of those other things that begin to test you. Part of the problem at the moment is when you have a bit of an issue with people who just don't really know the mechanics of the dungeons, and then it's going to make healers' lives harder. But I'm hoping, for Dragonflight in particular, that they start shifting this sort of balance away from what we saw out of Shadowlands. Because Shadowlands, dungeons in particular, just pushed healers to just be a 5th DPS. Said, okay, you just come run along with me, Jimmy. and just do some damage. And if you're in a really well-coordinated group, you don't have to do diddly squat when it comes to healing. Just sit there and boom. Okay, throw your Divine Star. All right, whoa, you did damage, and we chested the dungeon. It doesn't feel like you're an active participant in a very strong group. Okay? Which is just an inverse difficulty curve in a lot of cases. Because people who are doing low keys with Jimmy's terrible, terrible cousin Stevie, who just stands in everything and never kicks anything for the life of him, those dungeons are going to be a lot harder for these healers in Shadowlands, where you have to heal through all of the avoidable damage that just spews out everywhere. So people at lower level keys or in uncoordinated groups are just healing like mad, and then you graduate or you get into a high-end group or a strong team that's coordinated, and it feels like you do nothing. And there really wasn't that much of mid-ground or safe ground or anything like that between those two different kind of playstyles when it came to the healers, which sucked. So going back to Karazhan, or going back to even like Workshop and Junkyard to some degree, there's a lot of unavoidable mechanics that you have to be able to muscle heal through, and you have to be able to find a way to keep your team alive in the process. There's a lot of dodging, there's a lot of movement, a lot of extra mechanics that people have to be able to work on. And that's exciting to me because we're going back to a period where healers were focused on healing. Yeah, it's lovely if you can deal some extra damage in Karazhan. I'm not saying that healers should never deal damage, obviously, but it really starts showing that it's more of weaving damage and healing into different areas, and that is something that should always, always be applauded. And I think that should be the sort of secret formula they should go into for something like Dragonflight, because that's what has made Mythic Plus so successful over the years. Now, the problem is they're a bit too accurate, Mr. Blizzard, with how these dungeons worked of old. And what I mean by that is the only people who really did dungeons were very, very specific classes. Like, people will call out these days of like, oh man, like a Shadow Priest didn't get a 1%er title for Season 3. And you have a point. But there's actually some variety, not great variety, but there's some variety in terms of people getting into those high key groups. Back in Legion, there was a very, very specific meta that could be run in high keystones, and other classes, it's not that they couldn't do enough damage, it's not that they didn't bring interesting utility, they just could not survive. Or some healers could just not heal the content, like Resto Shaman and Holy Priest back in Legion dungeons. Hell, even Disc Priest. I was playing Disc Priest, and I just couldn't heal certain levels of dungeons and had to switch to Paladin. Other people were obviously dominating on Druid, and that was it when it came to a meta. So it's been a mixture of class improvements with legendaries, conduits, the works that have updated and improved playstyles, but also simple things like how much stronger Riptide is this expansion compared to like previous X-Packs, you know, what the Covenant options bring for like damage or healing and safety and survivability and all these different things, and movement, obviously, that make a very profound difference in terms of how the healers can actually engage with the content. Because even doing things like Mechagon, again, Holy Priest, Resto Shaman back in the day, terrible for healing those dungeons at high keystones. Now, they actually do it. They're actually pretty interesting, and it's actually fun to be able to go back and play those things because you never got the opportunity to do so beforehand because your group would just straight up bleed out. So now it's also going to be a big challenge to just muscle heal through that, because you'll go in there and see Flame Breathe, which would have people, you know, using heavy, you know, damage reduction defensives. You'd have like Devo Aura and Sack and Divine Protection and all these different abilities, and there'd be a lot of ways they'd mitigate it. Now, as Holy Priest, you may not have as many ways to mitigate that damage or reduce that damage, but you can also just muscle heal through it, and that's what you have to do. So that goes for, you know, like Maiden of Virtue as well, where back in the day you just have a lot of immunity classes or classes that could break themselves out with a little bit of self-damage, just to be able to immune that and then be able to reduce the party-wide damage or just mitigate it entirely. Nowadays, we're not trying to mitigate or cheese or avoid those things. We are surviving them, we're dealing with them, and just muscling through them. So I like that sort of change because the meta is a lot more accessible. There's a lot more healers that can just heal that content. And I like that there's a lot of unavoidable damage that's coming into these dungeons that does require your healer to work. Because nothing is more frustrating than having the feeling in a high-key, challenging environment that it doesn't really make too much of a difference whether or not you're doing 8 or 9k or 6k DPS overall in the key. You're probably going to time it by 1 minute or 2 minutes or something like that, negating some of your contributions to the group. Now dungeons are going to feel even more challenging for whether or not you're going to be able to heal them to begin with. And obviously the faster that you can kill off a number of mobs, the quicker they'll stop pulsing you with crazy AoE. And nothing pulses you like with crazy AoE like the Nathrezim infiltrators that we've been seeing for our Season 4 seasonal affix. Basically, they're a bunch of dreadlords that are around the dungeon. You can break them out. They give a little bit of trash percentage, and they'll give you these bounties, which will give you some secondary stats. They nerfed the versatility stat bonus. Instead of giving 2%, it now gives 1%, whereas haste, for example, or crit will give you 2%. I've been playing with a lot of haste as my bounty, but I think I'll probably be forced into switching to versatility as we get into higher keys, even though it's weaker, just because that survivability will become in handy for bosses like Morose, for bosses like Medivh, for areas of like Junkyard, just to make sure that I live. Actually, probably not Junkyard because of Go Haste, but probably like Workshop or something, just to make sure that you survive. Because the higher in keys that you're going to be going this season, the increasingly likelihood of those one-shots and just bosses stomping your living daylights and having like 1-2 combo punches to kill you, that will be very, very likely to happen as well. So overall, let me know what you guys think of Season 4. I've been pretty happy with it, mainly because I've played a lot back in the day. I've been playing like nonstop for like 8 or 9 years. And I know the alternative is we get zero content, and we have like 14 months of nothing, or 12 months of nothing, or 13 months of nothing, as we had in MoP and WoD. Most of Legion, we kind of had a little shakeup, but not that much, right? So overall, I'm glad we got something to do. I am a little conflicted about reprogging content, particularly in a raid, but I'm really enjoying the mix-up in Mythic Plus. And I know it's painful early on, but I hope that people are really enjoying it once people get familiar with it and once it gets a little bit more mature. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out the live stream for all our big keys, because I can finally push keys at the beginning of a season, as well as our faded Mythic raid content. All right? Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you'd like to see out of Season 4 videos, and of course, we'll keep on slamming alpha content as it comes. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll catch y'all next time.